Hi again, Peter here, and thanks for joining me for this Piotnet Grid Builder tutorial. In this video, I'm going to show you how to work with Piotnet Grid Builder, but more specifically, how to build cards using the Grid Builder. But before I get into the how, let's talk about the what first. What is a card? A card is essentially a container for an image, for text, for a blog post, for a WooCommerce product. And from the examples that you can see here, there is a card with some color, with some text in it. There I have an image with some text. Yet again, another image, a WooCommerce product, a search bar, an image with some text and taxonomy. So let's look at a few more examples. A card then essentially is a container that can have a specific size, a specific aspect ratio, and all of these cards together are put into what we call a grid. I won't be covering the details of how to create a grid in this video, but there will be a separate video on how to create grids. On the side there as well, you'll see that there are facets or filters, and I'll cover this in a separate tutorial as well. But essentially, as you can see, I have multiple different cards, different types of elements that make up a grid. Now this can be essentially anything you can think of. It can be an image, it can be a block with a button, it can be a blog post, it can be a product, it can be a testimonial. If you can think it, you'll most likely be able to card it. So down here I have a few more blog post examples. So here I can see I have 3 different card types: a larger one, a more rectangular one, and a slightly smaller square one. Again, here is another example of a card. These cards make up a grid, and I've used a facet to be able to scroll through these. Again here, WooCommerce products, each of these make up individual cards, a large blog post with some smaller blog posts, and again a facet to filter through these respective cards within the grid. So let's hop over to my WordPress backend for a moment and take a look at some of the example cards that I already have created or imported from what's available in the Piotnet library. So on the left hand side here, you can see the Piotnet Grid option in the menu. There are a couple of settings, and here we can see the cards, grids, facets, archive templates, and so on. But for today's video, as I said, I'll focus specifically on the cards only. So right at the top, I have the option to create a new card from scratch. We'll get into that in just a moment. Or I have the option to import demos, and there are a couple of demos already available. And with the import, it will also import all the details and settings around how each of these cards have been designed. So let me jump back then into one of the card options that I've already imported, and I'll head over to the Edit with Piotnet Grid option, and let's take a look at how this was built. So with the Grid Builder now open, to the left hand side you can see the menu of all the available items that I have available to build the card with, and we'll cover each of them in a bit more detail as we go through this video. But you can see I have options to put in a section to provide the structure for the card. Essentially, I can add text, buttons, specific terms and taxonomies, images, icons. For WooCommerce products, I have badges and wish list buttons, quick views, product ratings, variation swatches, an add to cart button. I can even place a field for a shortcode that I can reference in something that I've created elsewhere. And then obviously I have the icon list. Right down at the bottom, we have the various responsive screen sizes, preview, a couple of global settings, a button to take me back to my WordPress dashboard, and then also the navigator to take me through how this has been structured. So I'll leave that open to the side, and we'll use that to refer back to the items that we've created in this card. So let's take a look now at the composition of this specific card, and this is for a blog post. So you can see that it is quite large, but it will form into the right shape and the right size when I put this into a grid ultimately. So let's start from the top. Right up front, I have a section. So that is the main container where all of the components will rest in. Over on the navigator, I can see that I have a column within that section. I have an image within that column, And then I have a separate section, which is essentially this section right at the bottom, which is overlay on top of the image section that contains a column within it. It has an icon list and then 2 pieces of text. Now you'll see as I hover over this card, there is some animation applied as well, which you can do, and I'll show you where to find that in the settings in just a moment. So on the section, or with the section selected, then under the settings, you'll see that there are a couple of options. First and foremost is the layout option. So this is where I can specify the content width, either to be boxed or full width. I can specify for all of the responsive devices what the width needs to be, and I can also put a wrapper link or a section link URL in. And this can also be a dynamic tag. So if you're using JetEngine or MetaBox or Toolset, advanced custom fields, you can then draw information from that dynamically. If this card is a search section, you can then also enable search result sections within the section. I have options to set up whether this section is collapsible or not on various devices in normal and hover state, what the text color, background color, border radius, border type, etc. needs to be for that section. And then I can also enable or disable scrolling effects for this section. Next, if I move over to the Advanced tab, this is essentially the Style tab, but there are also a couple of additional ones which we'll look at the bottom. So there we have the different states of this particular section, the normal state which we're currently in, what happens if I hover on the widget, so I'll have the various settings on hover, and also the various card as a whole settings, that I can specify here. So there we have things like margins and paddings, what the width of this particular card needs to be, whether it needs to be in line, what the height is, positioning, is it absolute or is it default, Z indexes, overflows, text alignments and colors, typography, box shadows, borders, opacity, background gradient. We'll talk about the background gradient here in just a moment when we get to the second section. But these are some of the settings that you can put in and build your card with. And as you can see, they're quite extensive. And based on each of these element types, if I just hop back into the grid elements that I have available in the builder, I can use all of these settings depending on the type of element that I drag onto the canvas. So if I hop back over to the section and the settings within, down here we have some custom CSS. I can specify specific custom IDs and custom classes, specific advanced CSS on wrappers, specific animations, easing in, linear, easing out, etc. The duration of animations, the delay of animations. I can specify various attributes, and I can also set up conditional visibility of this card based on the certain status of whether a user is logged in, whether he's an administrator, a shop manager, customer, and so on. The next item over then is the column, and the column that sits within the section. So if I select it and put it into edit mode, you'll see the navigator also jumps to the column. And as you can see at the moment, the column sits flush within the parameters of the section. But I can always go and change that if I need to. So if I go on to the advanced section, and again here, all of the same settings that I had available on the section is also available on the column, as I mentioned before. So let's say, for instance, I wanted to add some margin to this. Let's just give that a value of 20. You can see that will space out and put in that margin all the way around. So I can disconnect this if I only needed margins or paddings in certain areas, to the left, to the right, top or bottom. But for now, I'm just going to bring that back to 0, just to bring that back flush. Now within the column, I have an image. So if I click on the image here, it will take me to all of the image settings. So I have settings, style, and also a couple of advanced settings. So in terms of choosing the image, I can either upload an image from my image library, or I can use dynamic data. So if I open this up, I can set this up as the featured image of my product or post, or my custom content or post type, and I have all of these options available, as I mentioned earlier: advanced custom fields, metabox, pods, toolset, JetEngine, and so on. I can switch the WooCommerce product on hover on and off. I can get images from the respective variations within a product, even if this was a product card. But since this is a post, none of these are really relevant. Here I can set up the image size based on what is available. I can set the image aspect ratio in terms of how it fits into this card. I can specify a custom URL, or I can navigate it to a media file. If there is a specific link URL, and again here, if I click on this image, it should navigate to the post URL. What is the link target? Is it self or blank? Does it open in a new window? What is the image caption? I can enable or disable lazy loading, and I can also set up this image to open in a lightbox or not. The lightbox image option is perfect for when you're creating cards of images that you ultimately want to put into a gallery grid of some sort. But considering that this is a card for a post, lightbox is not the right option to use here. If I head over to the style tab, then here I get some image styling options where I can specify custom sizes for each of the respective responsive devices, custom size with center mode. So where does the image fit within this aspect ratio? Does it have a border type, border radius, and what is the alignment? And then of course, I can set up some caption styling if I needed it on this particular image. So that covers the main section essentially, which is the top part that contains the column with the image. Now you'll see if I close this up, I have another section within this, which essentially means that this section is part of this column. So it's important when you start building these and dragging in the various section types, how you position them in your navigator to get the desired output. So in this instance, you'll see that I have the section that is within the column. And if I look at some of the settings, very similar to the one that I had earlier, which is the main section. But under the advanced area, if I head over to the position tab real quick, you'll see that this is set up to be an absolute position. And I can set the bottom absolute positioning to 0, which would essentially just drag it down to the bottom and place it over the existing section that I have on the bottom layer. So then within this section, then essentially again, I have a column, and within that column I have an icon list. And at this point in time, this icon list is the little clock icon that will display the post time in a specific format. Then I have a piece of text below that which is brought in, which is essentially the post title using dynamic tags. And again here, another text element which brings in the post excerpt, and I've specified a specific length. Now I talked about the background overlay just a moment ago, and if I just move away from this section, you can see that it starts off at the bottom with a much darker color, and it fades into almost blending into the image in the original section. So if I head over to the section then, and I go over to the advanced settings, and I go to the background gradient, you'll see that I've opted to put the background gradient on, and I've specified two items, essentially the bottom color and the top color, and how these two blend into each other. So if I look at item 1, which is the item at the top, it is at 0 position. It has an RGB color of 0, and it has a transparency of 0, so it is essentially see-through, so it blends into the image. And the second item is a black color with a full opacity at position 100, and that will allow it to blend from the bottom to the top. Let's look then at each one of these text elements or icon list and text elements independently. So if I select the icon list first, you'll see that there's a couple of settings. I can set this up to be vertical or horizontal, normal icon list styling. And within this, I have an item, and I can then use dynamic tags to specify what I would like to display in that icon list. I use the font awesome icon shortcode here, and I can go and select from all of the icons that are available in the Font Awesome library. I'll leave that as is. And if I head over to the dynamic tag option for the content itself, you'll see that I've got a lot of post meta that I can select from here. So there's the post time option. If I have any specific custom fields used with any of the additional plugins that I have installed here, I can use them. Author info, any WooCommerce info, if this is a product card, parameters, current date and time, shortcodes, archives, terms, and so on. So you'll see that the options here are quite extensive. So I'll leave that as is. And again here, if I wanted this to link to something specifically, I can either put in a URL or I can dynamically link that to something. And then obviously, of course, the link target is set up to self, to open in the same window in this instance. Over on the styling then, here I can set up the alignment of that icon list. So I can change that to center, right, or left. We'll leave that at left. What the spacing is between the icon and the content itself. I can set up the icon styling, the color, hover color, the size of the icon, and also the text style, text color, hover color. I can set up the typography, font family, text size, weight, transformation style, decoration, line height, and letter spacing. On the advanced tab then, pretty much the same settings that I have globally across the board for each of these element types that I mentioned earlier that are available in the catalog. I can set margins and paddings, positioning, opacity, background. I can set up some custom CSS and class IDs, etc. Next, if I head over to the first text element, which is essentially the post title, again here under the content settings, I've used a dynamic tag, which is the post title, or you can just put in something manually there as well. But the idea, because this is a card that will need to display post info, it is important that you use dynamic tags so that it recognizes each of the respective post titles as I put this into the card and also into the grid ultimately. I can specify the tag type of this title. It is currently set as an H3, but you've got all the different options available. The link URL, again, I can select a custom or dynamic tag, the link target, and the alignment of this. So I have the option to default left, center, right, or justify that text. Next then, over same thing, I have another text element, which is the post excerpt. And again, I can select that from the dynamic tags option. I can set this as a tag, which is currently a div. I can set up a link URL, a target, and alignment. Now over here we have the hover effect on the text, so you can see that it disappears. If I hover on the widget, it appears. And this is very simply set up by using the overflow property. So if I go over to the normal state on the advanced style and I go to overflow, you'll see that that's set to hidden. But I also set the height of this to 0. And if I move over to the hover card option, you'll see that the overflow is set to none, but there I've specified a height of 78 pixels. So if I hover over the text, it appears, and if I hover off, it disappears. Now there are a number of other ways that you can do this, of course. I mean, this is just one example. That's what the animation section is for, so you can set up animations to set up the behavior of certain items, the delay, the duration of the animations, or you can even just use simple custom CSS for certain behaviors on both the normal state, the hover widget, if it's just hovering on the text itself, or the hover card, if you want that behavior to be across the entire card. And this is essentially all there is to it to create this particular card type, which contains a featured image, some meta post time tag, a post title, and a post excerpt. And if you wanted to see what this would ultimately look like in the front end once you render this into your grid, you could always go and select an image to upload. I'll use this particular image, and that will give me a display of what that post type will look like. But considering the fact that I've set this up as a featured image and I want to pull dynamic data in, I'll just go ahead and remove that image. So let's have a look at another example. I'm going to head over to what I call the small post option. I'm going to click on edit with Piotnet Grid. And if you remember from the examples that I showed earlier, that's essentially this little piece here. So I've got a large card that I've put on the left hand side, and then there are obviously an array of all of these smaller cards within that same grid. Now I'm not going to talk about the grid design here, but when we get to that video, I'll explain exactly how you get to achieve this particular layout. Because as you can see from here, in the design itself, it looks significantly larger to what it does in the actual output when it sits in the grid, but it's all about the design of the grid in essence. Okay, so let me just bring up the navigator then, and in the navigator I can see that I have a section, I have 2 columns. Within the first column I have an image, and within the second column I have the icon list and the text element, which is the post title. So under the section, nothing fancy really. Again, you set up the layout, you can set up all of your various advanced settings if you need to. And then I drag in an additional section that will create the column within that section layout. So if I head over to the column, then I can see here I can specify various width, flex orders, alignment of the items, alignment of the content, and the justification. And you'll see that there is a slight padding or a margin applied to the outside of the image. So if I click on the image there and I go to the advanced section under margin and padding, you'll see that that's blank. And that is essentially because it does hold a default padding of 10 pixels. So if I wanted to change that, I can always set that adjustment. Let me just set that back to 0. So the margin, I can set up the margin. You'll see that it puts a 20 pixel margin around, and if I just clear that out, you'll see that it brings it back to its normal size. So again, here on the image, while I'm there, if I go over to the settings, again here, I've set up the image size. It's set to dynamically fetch it from the featured image. I can set up an aspect ratio of the image. Custom URL referring to the post URL opens in the same window, etc. On the right hand side, I have another column, and that column again contains an icon list. So here I have a 66%, so 66 plus 34 gives me 100%, the width of the section. Within that column, I've let the alignment and the alignment of the content, justification of the content to default. And then we have the icon list, which is pretty much the same setup as the example we looked a moment ago. Within that, I have the post time. So I can, of course, just remove that and add in the post time, and you'll see that it brings it in with the format. You can go and change that format if there is any particular format that you want to see. And then on the post title text, again here, I'm using dynamic content. So if I take that out and I put something else in, let's say, well, put the post title in, and here I can specify either a specific length, if there's only a number of words or characters that I want to display in this post, but considering that I want to show the entire post title, I can go and remove that section, and all that will be left is the entire post title that will pull from the dynamic tag. So a very simple example, but let's take it a step back, and I'll take you through step by step how we can actually build something as simple as this. And we'll look at a few other examples as well. I'll take you through some of the other things I've built, but let's take this one as the first worked example. So I'll head over to my cards library and let's create that example from scratch. So I'll head over to the add new, let's call this demo card post 1. I'll click on edit with Piotnet Grid. That'll save the template. I'll click on edit with Piotnet Grid again, and that'll take me to the grid builder. So here I am given a blank canvas where I can now drag any or all of these widgets onto the canvas to build out my card. So I'll start off with a section. I'll place the section in, and I'll just go and set all of the paddings and margins of this to 0 because I want the column that sits within this to be flush to the end. So I'll bring up the navigator and you'll see that I have a section with an embedded column already. I'd like to duplicate this column, so I do just that, giving me a 2-column layout, and then I'll go and set the width of each of these. So we'll set that to 34%, and I'll go to the opposite end and I'll set that to 66 and I get the same layout. Next, I'll drag in the image widget. I want to set this up to be the featured image. The image size, I can choose what size I want to use, full, thumbnail, width, etc. The aspect ratio, I can configure this if I want to. I want to link this to a custom URL, and the URL also needs to be the post URL, and I want to open it in the same window. Next then over, I'll go and drag in the icon list. So I'll put that on the right hand side. I want to keep it a vertical icon list. I want to add a single line item. So I'll click on add item. And here I want to remove the text and I want to use a dynamic tag. So here I want to use the post time. It gives me the format as well, and it already gives me the icon. So I'll just go into the library there and I'll go and select the clock icon. And there you can already see it gives me the display that I need. Next then over, I'll drag in a text element directly below that. And in the settings, I'll use another dynamic tag. We'll use the post title. I want to display the entire title, so I'll just remove the length parameter from there. I can set this up as an H3 tag. The link URL needs to go to the post URL, open in itself, and there you go. As simple as that, I've created this in less than 2 minutes. Next up, let's look at a product card, and I'll use one that I've imported from the Piotnet library. And then afterwards, I'll show you how we can create it step by step as well. So here I've got a card icon. I can see that it's built into a section. It's got an inner column and there's some padding assigned just to allow for the spacing between the various cards if I put this into a grid. And obviously also the product image has some padding between the edge of the card and the image itself. And then there's a post title or a product title, whichever one you choose to use. And then there's a product price and a wish list button. Okay, so let's take a look at how we would build this. So I'll go back over to my cards menu. I'll click on add new, and let's just call this demo product 1. I'll click on either save or edit with Piotnet Grid so that it saves that template, and I'll click on edit with Piotnet Grid again just to bring me back to the card designer. I'll start by dragging in a section. Let me just bring up the navigator as well just so we can see what we're working with. So I can see on the inside it has the section, obviously the column. The column is full width within the box layout, but I want to give that a specific width. I'll give that a width of 500, and that'll just bring that column width down to 500. I'm going to go ahead and add a padding to this all the way around. I'll put a padding of 15, and then I'll drag in another section within this, within that column. So there's our column, and I'll go and set up a padding on this as well. So this is the layout that I now currently have. I can now go and add an image. I'll put that image inside, and as you can now see here, I've got the outer column which will form the border of the card, including some spacing, and then I have the inner column which is essentially the card. So that would have a transparent background, of course. And if I move into the inner column, I want to set that up with some color. So I'll go to the background and I'll just make that color white so that that covers the area around the image. Next then I'll head over to the image. I want to set this up as a featured image. And I want to be able to, because this is a product card, if I have any variation product images or multiple images on my product, I want to be able to change the image on hover. So I'll set that to yes. And obviously also, if I have variations, I want to be able to get the image from the variation swatches that I selected. So if I put a variation swatch onto this, which I'm not going to do in this particular example, but if I change the swatch, then the image will change automatically based on what I've selected. Okay, so I've set that up. Let's set up the aspect ratio. Let's set up a ratio of 50. So let's make that 100 so that it's full size. And then next I want to add some text. I'll go back to the widget library. I'll add in a piece of hang on, before I do that, let me add in a new section first, because I want to divide this into 2 columns. So I'll add an additional section down at the bottom. I will add in a piece of text there, and I actually forgot to duplicate this, so let me duplicate that now, and I'll just go and delete that piece of text. And then I'll take the column width on this one, and let's make that 85%, and I'll take the column width on this one and just make it the balance. So this is where the text will sit, the product title and the product price, and on this end is where I'll put the wish list button. So let's do that now. So I'll go over to the text area, and I can either use the post title option, obviously, but if I scroll further down, I can bring in the product title, which will sit there. I can change the title tag. I can make some adjustments here, which I'll do to the text. Let's make that slightly larger, 16. Let's give that a weight. Let's make that 700. That's okay. And next I'll grab another piece of text, which I'll drop down below, and this will be for the price. Now I've got a few options for the price. I can show the full price, the original price, or the sale price, depending on how my WooCommerce environment is set up. Let's use the same as the example, and I'll drag the sale price in. And again, let's give that some styling. We'll make that 13, and let's give it a different text color as well while we add it. Let's do there we go. So next over then, I'll bring in the add to wish list button. On this column though, I want to set up the justification so that the icon is displayed in the middle and not top aligned. So on the justification, I want to align that to center, and the justification of the content will put flex end. And then I'll go ahead and grab in the add to wish list icon, which drops that down into the middle. Let's keep the alignment as center there. I'll choose a background color for this, which will be slightly lighter, and we'll choose the icon color. Sorry, the icon color slightly darker. We'll put the background color, we'll make that slightly lighter. I'll give the icon a padding of, let's say, 10 around, and let's give it a border radius of 100, and let's just drop that icon size down a little bit. So there you can see the icon also has some animation on it. So this is on the normal state, and then obviously on the hover state, I want the little heart to change color. So let's do that. Let's give it a bright pink color. I like that. And there you'll see if I click on it, it's not changing at the moment. Icon size, again, we'll keep that at 30, that's fine. And I'll click on save. And that's as simple as that. I've taken a few elements, I've built out a few sections, few columns, used some featured images, dynamic tags, and I've built a very simple product card template. The last example I want to show you is one where I've created a custom post type to create team members, which will allow me to create cards where I can cycle through team member information. So for this example, I've used JetEngine. I've created a custom post type called team. Within that team, I've created a few team members, and if I look at the data, the dynamic data that's within this team, I've created a few field types, one for name, one for title, a couple of social media fields, and then an image field. And I'm going to use all of these fields when building out this card. So let's create a new card. I'll call this team member card. I'll save that, and I'll click again to open with Piotnet Grid. So once again, as usual, I've got my blank canvas. I'll start by dragging in a new section. Let me open up the navigator again so we see where we are. I'll expand that so we've got a column with nothing inside, but I also want to edit the width of this and have the column displayed inside to be slightly narrower, similar to the product card that I've created earlier. So I have that inside. Again, here also I'll go into the advanced settings and I'll add a common padding of 15 pixels all the way around. That will include the spacing between the cards. Next then I'll go and drag in another section inside of that, and again here I'll add some padding to this as well. So I'll go in and I'll add a 15 pixel padding. Whilst I'm now in here, I'll go and drag in an image widget, and here instead of setting that as the featured image, I want to pick up a JetEngine field on that custom post type that I've created. So I'll select the JetEngine field, and because I know the name of that field is image, actually it's image, I'll select that as the field name. I'll leave the image size there, and I'll set the content ratio to the aspect ratio to, let's see if I make that 50. No, let's make that 100. In any case, I want to resize this anyway, and I want to put a round image in for that particular person. So I'll go over to the style section and I'll select the custom size option, and I'll select the custom size with center mode option, and this will allow me to then set up the image size as 150 by 150. I can even make that slightly larger. Let's make that 200 by 200. I want to align this image to the center, and I also want to give it a border radius of 100, making that a round image. Now I can move this down slightly even more because that is rather close to the end. So let me go into the column then for the image, and I'll go and add some additional top padding. So let's say we put a padding of 30, maybe 40 at the top. So now that I have that in, I want to add a few more things. So I want to add the name of the person. I want to add the title or the designation, perhaps a button where you can click to view the profile, and then also a couple of social media icons that will direct them to this person's social media pages. So I'll go first then, and I'll grab a piece of text or a text widget, and I'll place that directly under the image. And for the content, I again go into the JetEngine field option, and I need to specify the field that I want, and there I want to display the name field. I'm just going to make that an H3. The alignment I want center, and then under the settings area I can go in and change the typography. So let's give that, let's say, a size of 18. We give it a bold weight, and I want to add a margin at the top just to give it some space from the image. So I can either duplicate this field or I can create a new one. I'll go ahead and create a new one. So I'll drag a new field in, I'll place that down below. I'll use another JetEngine field, and in this instance I'll call that title, because that's the name of the field that I've created for this. I'll make that an H4. I'll set the alignment to center, and again here I'll put a margin in at the top, let's say 15. I'll go down to the typography settings. I'll give that a size of 16, and we can maybe change the color of this as well. So let's go and pick a nice color that can be displayed in. So next up, I want to add in a button which will serve as the view profile button. So I'll go ahead and I'll drop a button in. I'll change the button text to view profile. If I have a specific page that this needs to reference to, I can add that in, or I can just put the URL in. But ideally I want to have a profile page set up for this person so that I can add a dynamic tag to link to that. So I'll put this as center, Again, I'm not going to change the color of the button now. You can do this any styling that you want. I'll just set up this card just to give you an idea of where I'm heading. Okay, so I've got the view profile, and then next I want to add in another section, and that section will sit directly below this, and I want to divide this into 4 columns. So I'll go and I'll duplicate the column 4 times. Well, actually no, let's start off by creating all the content in the first one, and then I'll duplicate that 4 times. So inside of that column, I want to place an icon. I want to set up the columns so that the alignment is center, the justification, alignment, everything is set up to center. I can then go onto the icon. Let's go select the Facebook square icon. I'll put that in. Icon type. Let's say justification is center. On the style tab, I can go and put in the size of this icon. Maybe let's make that slightly larger. Let's say 30 pixels. And then I want to also set up the hover effect, the overflow. So I'll go back into the advanced section. If you remember from an earlier card that we did, on the normal state, I want to set the overflow to be hidden. I want to set the height to that regard to be 0. That takes that away. And if I hover on the card, I want that height to be displayed at, let's say, 30. Okay, so that will just reveal that icon as I hover over it. If I go back to the icon, style, hover icon, let's say we want the icon color to be, let's make them all a uniform color. So if I hover over that icon, that changes. Perfect. Then now that I've created this and the effects, I'll go ahead and I'll duplicate this column 4 times. And then all I'll do is go into each of these and I'll go and adjust the icons of each of the social media profiles. That one is Twitter. The next one we'll choose LinkedIn. And for the last one, we'll choose YouTube. Perfect. That being said, I set up a custom field within the custom post type to also attach the URL. So if I go back to the icon and I go to the settings area, I can now link the icon URL to a JetEngine field. I want to open that in a new window, and I want that field, if I just scroll down here, let me just bring that down. I know that the field for this one was called Facebook, which contains the URL, and I'll have to do the same for all the others as well. So I'll go ahead and do that now. Okay, and what you'll notice obviously is because this is now a link, it has updated the colors of those links or those icons to the default settings that I have in my global settings for link styles. But that's not the end of the world. I actually quite like this color. It looks pretty cool. And even on the hover state, you can see that it changes color. But that's how simple it is to create, again, using specific custom field types, using JetEngine, pods, advanced custom fields, toolset, metabox, whatever you use to build out particular cards. Use dynamic tag data to create very intuitive cards. And that's all I have for you today. Thank you so much for watching. Please stay tuned to watch our future tutorials where we go in depth on how to create grids and ultimately facets. We'll put all of that together to design a beautiful final product. Thanks again for watching. Talk to you soon. Bye for now.